So lovely to have an audacious conversation with you. I was actually really looking forward to this. It was a sort of my highlight of the day. So I wanted to, well, before we even start, you know that I have started this Audacious project sort of a few weeks ago, where I committed myself to having audacious conversations with people that I love, that people who inspire me. And yeah, it was great when we matched to do it. And I'm going to keep saying it, that my intention for this conversation is to bring audacity into the mainstream and redefine that word in the way that Brené Brown redefined vulnerability. And I've got the 3 C's: the courage, the caring, and the non-conformity that you and I were briefly talking about when we before we went live. But I just wanted to, well, I wanted you to introduce yourself in a really audacious way. And I know I've got, what I had there was really this sort of unorthodox, pastor, and then the McKinsey, and then, you being an entrepreneur, all into a blender. But you give me your definition, your audacious definition.
Yeah, so let me just explain. Yeah, so what you're referring to is, I often say that I'm what you get when you take a McKinsey consultant, a slightly unorthodox pastor, and an entrepreneur, and put them in a blender, right? That's what I like to say. So let me try and spice that up as we're trying to be audacious. So I'm going to say, perhaps I'm also what you get if you put a recovering high achiever, a wannabe rock star, and somebody who's sometimes a bit too hard on themselves into a blender.
Great. Well, let's see which one. My heart goes into a wannabe rock star somehow. Would be great to explore that. But again, my intention for this conversation is to keep them fun, to go with the flow. So I mean, again, last time I had Rita, who we both know, and that's what we were saying. It's audacious, not knowing where we're going, really. And it's just exploring some of the things that we both do in the world. And I know one of your big claims is really that you are working with people to 10x their financials, their impact, their fun, and to become world-changing forces for good. Yeah. Tell me the story behind that.
Yeah, so it feels audacious to me, right? Or it felt audacious to declare that. You know that thing when you're on, I mean, I don't really do this, but there was that whole thing. Probably it's not trendy anymore, like on Facebook, where people would like update their relationship status, was like the big thing about declaring that you've got a boyfriend or a girlfriend, or you've got married or whatever. Or on LinkedIn, it's that when you change your profile, your byline, or to declare you've got a new job, or you're up to something new in the world. And there's that moment when it goes public that feels a bit audacious, right? It feels a bit edgy because you're now stepping in, you're making a commitment in public, in a sense. And so there was a stage when I was building my business, and I really said, okay, what is I'm building my business, I get the chance to create it how I want. I know I've always wanted to create some kind of impact, but where do I want to go from here? And I had this awareness, I can help people get, leaders get their promotions and deliver on their goals and sort their teams out and that kind of thing. And that's okay, but I wanted more. I was like, what do I really want? Like, if I could really just take away all the filters, what do I really want? And I realized I wanted people to help people change the world. It's not like I have one mission, like it has to be the environment, or it has to be, this social justice issue or whatever, because I believe that everybody has a story, and somewhere in that is this idea of wanting to change the world. But I realized in my own life, and as I saw with my clients, that when you're a high achiever, like, it looks great and everyone's really impressed and they're like, wow, that's cool. But inside, you don't feel that special. It just feels it's what you do. And I could probably, why aren't I making the impact I really could have? Because this seems to just happen, fall in my lap. It just seems to have happened. How could I play beyond that? So that's where I said, I really want to work with the world's top business leaders. And I have some of those top business leaders as my clients. So it's a reality. There's always more. But let's not forget the reality. Yeah, these are top business leaders, extraordinary leaders, billion-dollar, people running billion-dollar businesses, or tech unicorns or smaller businesses, but they're still extraordinary, right? Most people would never get to where they've got to in terms of what they've been able to build. So I'm doing it. So how can I help them make a difference? And I suppose I sat with that for a while. It's like, do I dare? Like, can I really claim that I can be the go-to coach and advisor for those kind of leaders who have seen great success and really want to go beyond 10x and create a huge impact? And I had to sit with it. And until I actually got annoyed with myself at one point, because I was like, oh, Richard, you're wishy-washy. You're not really going for it. You're not pushing. And I listened to a Tony Robbins podcast, like a talk he did. And, he's so like certain and so like, and I was just like, why? I don't come out like that. I was thinking, I'm not like that. I'm just like, eh. So I got so annoyed with myself. I was like, okay, what am I certain about? And I wrote myself a list and I recommend it to my clients. It's called a certainty list. What are the things that are your bedrock that you really know for sure? So I wrote down things like, I am certain that if the world's top business leaders do not be forces for good and change the world for good, then who will? Right? And I also said, I'm certain that I have the credentials, the experience, the intellect, the heart, the passion, the mission, the purpose to add value and serve these leaders and help them do what they want to do. And I realized I believe that. I realized if not me, then who? Like, who am I waiting for to come and do that? And so for somebody who, I think fundamentally I don't like to kind of talk about all my successes or whatever, but I had to get in touch with that and say, no, like this is a mission that's important to me and I can deliver it. And so that was what helped me, if you like, start to make those slightly audacious claims. And now I'm really in on it. This is my mission. It's going to take me probably the rest of my life to live that out. But that's the game I'm playing.
That is super audacious. I was like, how dare you make that big claim, Richard? But, in a way, to have that, the world-changing forces for good, that is amazing. I love that claim. I love that declaration. Because, you and I are part of 4PC, and I just said, Gisela saying hello. So lovely to see you here, Gisela. I can't actually read from LinkedIn. Sometimes I don't know the name. So I shall be able to acknowledge a lot more of you when this is done. But we have those the times where we make those big audacious declarations, and when you make them out there in the public domain, or certainly between us, they have got a much bigger energy, as we call it. And I would love to explore. So for me, Audacity is courage, care, non-conformity. Which one of those 3 C's resonates most with you, Richard?
They're all great, actually. They're all great. Where do I want to start? Well, let's go with care, because I talk a lot actually about courage in many ways, because when I talk with leaders about how they're going to become the leaders who can create that 10x more, I talk about being more strategic and more magnetic. Strategic is like focusing in, and that's very courageous activity. It's quite courageous to really focus and to let go of the things that made us successful in the past. And magnetism means turning up the dial on our sense of mission, on how we inspire people, on the fact that we're inspired, right? On the leadership that we bring. And that, again, can be courageous. But I think underpinning all of this, especially on that magnetism side, is care. And so perhaps let's go there, because I think sometimes it's easy to feel the fear factor of, do I dare make this next leap? Perhaps we can talk about that later on if we've got time, which is the side. But I think the care, for me, it is why I do what I do. So perhaps we go there.
That'll be great. So why don't we start with that? Because it's interesting. When I first, that I wrote the book, The Audacity Spectrum, and that's my, the line is leading with care, courage, and non-conformity. And originally I had the courage. For me personally, I always say that, what people get when they work with me is courage. But then it was through some of our conversations, and it was, again, a common friend, Parisa, who made me swap the care with the courage. So I'm starting with care, because in a way it's even more audacious to start with the caring bit. You have to care so much about something to have the courage to do it effectively.
Yeah.
So who do you have a role model of someone who really cared in their life, in their leadership?
Yeah. I think my mother was a real inspiration to me. So my mother died at age 59. Again, one of my core beliefs is that let's not leave impact till retirement. Let's not leave giving back until some myth in the future, right? Let's build it into how we operate now. Now, my mother she never wanted to be anything but a mother. She didn't want a job. We used to laugh because she would get a job and she would find a way to leave it, a few months later. She was just not into it. But my sister, Georgina, was severely mentally disabled and physically disabled. She needed 24-hour care. She couldn't speak. And Alina, we've talked about this. My sister was a huge inspiration for me because we both had the same genes, and yet I had this high-flying career at Oxford and Cisco and strategy consulting and everything else. Moved to France, had a family, and my sister stayed at home, couldn't speak, had all these medical issues. And so I really felt that sense of responsibility. Like, I get to play, I got we have the same DNA, but I get to play and make a difference, right? So let's go for it. But my mother ended up, because of this, obviously taking care of my sister for many years, and then as she got a little bit, we got some more care support structures around, or she got a bit older, she gradually took over the responsibility of being the national secretary for the UK charity to do with this condition. Mm-hmm. So she was the first point of call for new mothers or new families when they had this diagnosis. Your baby has got this incurable genetic disorder that can affect you in a million different ways. And people are devastated, right? And she was there at that moment to be the support and she did it with such care. She really found her mission. Like, she was the great example of being practical, but also being super caring and engaging people in the moment where they really needed her. And during my teenage years, as she was doing this, she's like, oh yeah, mum's up in the office on the phone talking to somebody else, or she's on the computer writing a letter or whatever. And then, I knew she was like doing her job and she was very passionate about it. And then she passed away, and we got thousands of cards. And letters, long, heartfelt letters, and the church, the funeral was absolutely packed, and there was tens of thousands of pounds raised because we said no flowers, but make a donation. They created a foundation in her name to provide respite care to other families with handicapped children whose parents could not get away for even a minute, or even a week or weekend. They couldn't get any rest, and it was so important with my sister growing up. My parents had a few people who they could call on occasionally, and just to go away, perhaps the three of us or the two, my parents, it was so important. And so my mum made a huge impact because she was caring, and she cared so much that people felt it. And even 20 years later, they wrote that letter. And so that was always inspiring to me, because I looked at all the other people who had these, so-called impressive business people and high-flying jobs or whatever. And I was like, how many people will write to them at their funeral? So that's what kind of so made a big difference on me, that idea of care. And something I've worked on myself is when I first did my own business, I was like, people need me to be the smart consultant that I knew how to be in my corporate career. And gradually I realized to add more parts of my personality back into the mix. And there was a moment where actually Parisa, who you mentioned, she was talking about how she liked to how she had her clients' backs, and they all knew that she had their backs. And I was like, oh yeah, do my clients know that I have their back? That I really care about them, that I really want them to be the world-changing leaders I know they can be, and I've got their back for when when it's tough, when they're down, when they're stressed out, when they're not performing. And so I started to tell my clients this. I started to give them hugs. I started to just let them know, I care about you. And what was interesting, Alina, was they went, oh, Like now I don't have to perform to you. Like now I don't have to try to impress you so that you think I'm as good as your other clients, whoever they are, Richard. And I never forgot that. People thinking, well, I was thinking, wow, I thought I was just trying to add value to people. And what they felt was, oh my word, Richard's really impressive. I need to be really impressive back. And so when we changed that into a conversation of care, then magic happened.
Wow. Thank you so much, Richard, for sharing that. Sorry, I didn't know. I knew Beats and I knew about Georgina, but that's very moving. So thank you for sharing it. And you just reminded me of the power and the impact, as you said, the caring leadership, if I can dare to call it that way. And you don't have to have the top CEO job to be an incredible caring leader. As your mum has just proven. And I'm actually part of, it's called a Special Mums. It's a group of mothers of children with various disabilities in London, and we meet once every quarter. And I have to say, I never failed to be so impressed about some of those stories of well, I'm calling it success, because when you have to care for a child who is different in many ways, it is extraordinary. It is extraordinary to have that added 10x in a different way. I always say, my story, I mean, it's no way anywhere yours or some of the other stories. And when my son was diagnosed 10 years ago, he's on the spectrum, but he is very much on the high functioning. And yet it is that sort of 10x sensitivity, 10x, everything feels 10x more intense. So it's a different type of challenge. But
of course,
but yeah, thank you for sharing that. Actually, to just go into the caring, I wanted to actually just take us a little bit from that energy. You talked about the magnetic energy in a way, non-conformity, because you mentioned the wannabe rock star, and I know one of your favorite bands or role models, I suppose it's Freddie Mercury. And I've got this, it's only because I was just looking at your book, and it's, I love that chapter 45, which is words are your weapon, and then you start with Freddie Mercury, I feel so inarticulate, and it really felt audacious to just have the fun to read that. So take me there.
About the Freddie Mercury piece.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, I think, so I always loved, I got into Queen. I heard back in the day, they came on the radio, and I was like, wow, who was that? And it's what got me into electric guitar and everything else. So I'm a bit of a Queen geek. I've been able to pass that on to my kids. But what I think is fascinating was that Freddie was able to completely embody his message, so that when he was on stage, he was on a mission. He wanted to touch you emotionally with his music, right? And he connected with you at the back of the stadium. That was, it was really, right, was being able to really do that and be completely embodied in what he was saying and doing, right? At a time when, let's face it, quite a lot of probably pop stars at the time, were not dressing around in leotards and jumping around and being flamboyant. They were kind of trying to be cool and not move too much. But he was like, no, I'm going to really bring it. And so for me, I found I had the spectrum myself of I can be really analytical and in my head and kind of problem solving. And I see a lot of my clients, they can be great strategists and they can go there. And I just need to have a better plan to sort things out, to 10x just means I have a 10x better plan, right? And that's the over-indexing on the strategic. And then there can be times where I go to the far side and get a bit more and normally it's with people I feel very safe with in certain environments. So, you'd have seen me in this mode, some of our other encounters, where I'm like, oh, I don't know what's going on, oh, I've got all these doubts and, can I deliver my mission or whatever it is? And I can kind of be very insecure, perhaps. Or I can go into that place. I don't stay there generally very long. but I can go into that place, because especially when you're on a big mission, there can be moments where you go, can I sustain that level of energy required to embody that? And so I can be in that kind of slightly needy place of, oh, what's going on? But what I found is when I come back into that middle zone, is being embodied, which is back to that inner Freddie Mercury, I'd like to call it. So actually really getting clear, this is the mission I'm on. I'm here to help the world's top leaders be forces for good at scale, be more strategic, more magnetic, so that they can create a legacy, that's going to be powerful for, that they're going to love telling their grandchildren about, that makes a difference. When I connect to that, then I can bring my most magnetic self. And so that's how I kind of see this inner rock star. And so there's what's that book called? It's called Feel Good Productivity. It's just come out, I think. There's a distinction in there which I've now blatantly stolen, which is this difference between being serious and being sincere. So you talked about non-conformity. So, I showed up the other day to one of my CEO workshops that had between 10 and 20 chief executives on a call. And I turned up with my long-haired wig, my shades, my guitar, and I did this whole little intro skit before racing off and coming back on. So I turned up as Rocking Rick, my twin brother, and then I raced off and I came back on as me, and we continued the session. And everyone was laughing, and it really loosened them up. We had a great conversation as a result. But the reason I did that was because I'm so sincere about what I stand for and what moves me and what drives me and what I'm trying to do, that I don't have to be serious all the time to do that, because the mission is more important. If I need to dress up like a rock star to get my point across, I will, and actually I think fun is a really essential part, because when we don't have enough fun, we can't get through the barrier. It's like, why would you do something that's even more of a grind? So I like to bring some of that kind of non-conformity to those moments. Do pattern interrupts for people, say something which is they're not expecting, to kind of shake them out of their thought patterns. And so so that's where the kind of rock star piece comes in, as well as the fact, obviously, like, if you give me a guitar, I will pose around for you and do my air guitar or play my real guitar. So I just love that. I
wish you told me that before. I would have challenged you. I would have dared you to bring the guitar and do it live with us, actually, because I love that. For you, it's just being on that spectrum to bring your inner Freddie Mercury, and even that image of you just having the wig and having the guitar and going to, playing with your clients, really just short-circuiting them, as you said. But I love
and actually, just to say, I lived that out the other day, because our community, that we both belong to, had a retreat, and they were doing a rock star party, and so I turned up as Rocking Rick. I had all the gear from this thing, but I also turned up at the start as Freddie Mercury. I got my Freddie Mercury kit out, stuck my false moustache on, and got everybody singing, when he goes, "Hey, oh," and he gets everybody singing. And I got them all doing it. And for somebody who's not a great singer, that was a little bit daring for me. But I thought, if I'm going to talk about this stuff, I should actually release my inner Freddie. So I did.
So you do it. I wish you told me. Now you told me. Next time, if we're going to have another LinkedIn Live, I will dare you to show up, like in your inner and outer Freddie Mercury, Richard. But we've got a few. I think we've got Gisela, Tatiana. So lovely to see you here. We've got Kate Tilbury. Is there any question from any of you out there that you will want to pose to Richard, really, or
an audacious one, a really, really juicy one that's going to make
juicy one? Yeah, it's anything that I would love to see that funny side of you, Richard. Just the inner.
There is no funny side.
It's only the serious side, as you said. It's a sort of the serious side or the sincere side. It is. I love that distinction. And let's see if anything sort of comes. But I was talking about podcast. I was listening to a recent podcast with Simon Sinek and Charles Duhigg. And again, they're making that distinction between, discussion being made up of different conversation, the emotional conversation, the practical conversation, the social. So, okay, we've got Sophie. How is it possible to reconcile the force for good with short-term goals, remuneration targeted that are anything but audacious? The whole manage for A, reward for B scenario.
Yeah, I see this all the time. Thank you. Yeah, it reminds me of a conversation. So first of all, it's probably not an easy answer, but I'll give you some thoughts here. I had a conversation with one of my clients the other day. He's not actually, most of my clients are CEOs and entrepreneurs. This is actually a CTO, but he's running he's in a 7,000 person organization. It's quite a big role. And he was talking about this thing, like, how do I've got these goals coming down from me, these things, and yet we've got this transformational thing which is really going to make a difference that I'm really there to champion. And so again, it was this idea of the short and the long term, right? Every senior leader has it. How do I do the long term, but actually there's all this pressure for the short term? And I think one of the things here is actually leading. In other words, although we might have things coming down, when we actually say, well, you know what, this is what I stand for, and this is what I think is important, and this is how I can kind of reconcile where we're going in the short term with the long term, then people will start to listen. So for me, it's a magnetism question, right? It's like, can we actually start to influence those people around us? So in my book, so it's like digression, but in the book, this is making time for strategy, right? But because I find that making time is key for exponential change. But this is tactics, this is influence, mindset and environment. But the influence part is really important, because you might have like the plan, the goal, how I want to be a force for good. But if we can't influence the people around us, we're going to be limited. So this is really an influence challenge, right? So that means that we are going to have to obviously do some short-term things that kind of give us the credibility to do the longer term things. But I would say, first of all, tactically, it's like, are we waiting to do the force for good? Is it at the bottom of our list? It's like strategic and operational, right? If we start with the operational, we'll never get to the strategic, right? We'll run out of hours in the day. But if we do the strategic things first, make a day a success early in the morning, then we can spend the rest of the day catching up on our operational tasks. And so don't leave the force for good bit, don't leave the longer term legacy piece to the bottom of the stack once you've done everything else. But think about, what's one way I can move forward that agenda of being a force for good, right? What's one shift that would actually allow me to do more of that and less of this other stuff? How can I delegate the operational things, or how can I streamline those? So it really is actually, probably the more I think about it, it is actually a time and attention management question. And the question is, what comes first? And that's where our own self-leadership has to come into action. When we talk in my book, I say, well, basically operations is what everybody else asks you to do, and goals, as you said, Sophie, and strategy is what you do to the world. You happen to it. You take what you see as important and you make that happen. So I think that's where I start to go, is influence, and how important is that on our own radar for being a force for good? Are we actually working on that?
Yeah, for me, as I think about it, and thank you for that question, Sophie, it's really just setting an intention and constantly testing against that. Am I now being a force for good? Whatever it is that we're doing on a small scales, is that contributing to the long term?
Yeah, and as you know as well, if you've got a 25-year goal, you only have to do 1% each quarter.
That's right.
And also in every conversation, I'm thinking, how am I helping this person find out how they can be a force for good in the world? So it might not be that every conversation I'm absolutely, working with some, Fortune 100 CEO rolling out $1 billion plan, right? But I'm still saying, am I living out this mission that I'm on in this conversation? Am I rolling the ball forward? Am I further ahead today than I was yesterday? So in this conversation, in the next conversation, how can I move these things forward, right? How can I progress towards the vision that I see important?
Yeah, the 2% steps, the 2% little, audacious steps. But I'm aware that we're literally more or less at the end. We can have a lot of fun. But I have asked Rita, who was here 2 weeks ago, to ask a question to the next guest. So she knew it would be you. And, her question to you is, Richard, what is your audacious next 10x? Into 3 words.
10x. My audacious next 10x is to work with, I think it's really to work with my next set of clients. I already have some of those clients, but I think my goal is to really be the person that even when somebody says, Richard, I've nailed my strategy, I'm great at my strategy, it's all happening, execution is happening, that's all running, and yet I really want to change the world at really big scale. I want them to think of me. So I think the shift for me is going more from an outbound and network-based approach to more of becoming a name that people think of when they're ready to change the world.
Here we go, to the world changes. So fabulous. I think that would be your next 10x, is actually to become the world changing force for good, or be, and the same everybody else around you. That's fabulous. Thank you. And so what would be the next first thing, sort of where that if anybody wants to do that with you, how can they do that? How can they find you?
Yeah. So I think my business is called Xquadrant. It's just the letter X and the word quadrant. So xquadrant.com. I'm going to suggest if people, so there's 2 key resources. If you go to xquadrant.com/insider, I have a daily, or kind of a couple of times a week, short email that's really focused on this goal of helping you 10x your financials, your positive impact in the world, and the fun you have along the way. And I share examples from my work with these top CEOs and entrepreneurs in that newsletter. So that's why I'd recommend people start. Also, if you like podcasts, I have a podcast. You can go to xquadrant.com/podcast, and that's called the Impact Multiplier CEO. And there I interview some of these extraordinary leaders. I've interviewed over 100 of them so far, possibly 150. Getting onto the inside track of their story. So that's for me. And Alina, I know this question of audacity is super important for you right now. I know you've got your book as well coming out on it. So again, it's pretty worth saying the same thing for you. Like, what if people want to find out how to be more audacious themselves, what resource would you point them to?
Well, the resource for me, I don't have the book yet as you do. That's coming out into the world in August. But the easiest way would be to subscribe to the newsletter. I think the same as you. I've got a letter, which is newsletter called Audacious Leadership. And then under the business Adaptaa, we have another newsletter, which is called Authentic Leadership. So that's probably the easiest way for people to see and connect with us, with the community on LinkedIn. But thank you. Oh, Angela's here. Wow, that's so lovely to see you here. Changing the world, Richard Medcalf. Absolutely. You heard it here first, Angela. We already knew that. So thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you to everybody who's been here with us, whether we could see you or not see you. And it was a pleasure. Really touched, Richard. Thank you very much for being with me here today. Next time, Freddie Mercury, eh?
So I'll leave you with my inner Freddie, right? Which is I'm just gonna have to finish by saying, thank you, LinkedIn. You've been a fantastic audience. Good night. I love you.
We love you too. Thank you. Bye for now.
Bye, everybody.